This recording is Chapter 5, Part 1 of 3, the Integumentary System. The integumentary system includes our skin, glands, hair, nails, and the primary function of skin is to act as our primary defense mechanism for protection against different types of mechanical forces such as abrasion, as well as chemicals, pathogens, microorganisms. The word integument means covering. There are two types of skin found on the body. We have thin, hairy skin and thick, hairless skin. The greatest difference in the thickness of the skin is due to a layer in the epidermis referred to as the stratum corneum. That's the uppermost layer that you're actually touching when you touch the surface of your skin. Thick skin is only found on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. It has ridges on the surface referred to as epidermal ridges. It also has within the epidermis another layer not found in thin, hairy skin. That additional layer is referred to as the stratum lucidum. And thick skin has neither hair nor sebaceous glands. If we look at this particular picture on this slide, you will notice a hair follicle surrounding a hair, and this portion of the hair follicle is where the sebaceous gland is located. Sebaceous glands are always going to be associated with hair follicles. They produce an oily product known as sebum. Our skin consists of two layers. The larger of the two is the dermis. Above the dermis is the epidermis, which is the outer layer of skin. Where our skin is thick, containing all 5 layers, we see those layers from top to bottom listed on this slide. If we go from bottom to top, the deepest layer is the stratum basale. The next layer above is the stratum spinosum. Then we have the stratum granulosum, the stratum lucidum, and the stratum corneum. There are different mnemonics to remember the layers of the epidermis, depending on whether you want to go from bottom to top or top to bottom. If we were to go from top to bottom, we know that the first word is always going to be stratum. There should not be an S on that word. And if we take the first letter of the first layer, we have C for chocolate, followed by L, followed by G, followed by S, and then followed by B. So from the top down, some people like the mnemonic, cats love getting some bacon. Another mnemonic is preferred by some people who like to go from the bottom layer upward. And so those people start with B, S, G, L, and C to form the mnemonic, boys say girls like chocolate. We're going to take a closer look at the layers of the epidermis before going into the dermis. You'll notice deep to the dermis is a layer known as the hypodermis. The hypodermis is deep to the dermis, is considered not to be a part of the skin. However, if you ever hear of someone using a hypodermic needle, or a subcutaneous needle for an injection, those needles are long enough to go into the hypodermis. The hypodermis is mostly comprised of adipose connective tissue. This slide gives us a better idea of some of the cells that we would find in the epidermis. Melanocytes are cells that produce the protein pigment melanin, which contributes to the color tone of our skin. Dendritic cells, also called Langerhans cells, are important because they are macrophages. They will migrate through the epidermis to eat up cellular debris or to remove pathogens in the form of bacteria that could be harmful or viruses. Keratinocytes are cells that produce the protein keratin, and keratin lends to making our skin harder, as well as helping to lend it some waterproof characteristics. We also see tactile cells. Tactile cells are also known as Merkel cells. Tactile cells respond to light touch. Upon receiving that stimulus, tactile cells will release chemicals that will be received by a tactile disc, which is a separate structure just deep to the tactile cell. We're going to look at the layers of the epidermis a little bit more closely. On this slide, we're going to start with the stratum basale, which is a single layer of cube-shaped cells. The stratum basale is where we find the melanocytes that produce melanin. We also find the Merkel cells, which are also known as tactile cells, to transmit information regarding light touch. We have a lot of cube-shaped basal cells, which are undergoing mitosis on a consistent basis to produce more keratinocytes as these cells migrate from the base towards the surface as they're pushed in that direction upon the process of mitosis. From the stratum basale, the next layer is going to be the stratum spinosum. The stratum spinosum gets its name from the fact that these cells are held together by desmosomes, which gives them a spiny or spiky appearance under the microscope. I'm not highlighting the entire area of stratum spinosum on this slide. It would take a lot of time. The stratum spinosum is where we find the Langerhans cells, also known as dendritic cells, which are going to phagocytize cellular debris, microbes, bacteria. And then the next layer of cells within the epidermis is formed by a layer known as the stratum granulosum. You'll notice that the cells in the stratum granulosum tend to stain a little bit darker than the cells just deep to it in the stratum spinosum. The stratum granulosum gets its name because as the cells get to this level of the layer of the epidermis, they have been pushed far enough away from the dermis, where blood vessels are located, that the organelles inside those cells start to break down and start to have a very grainy appearance when they're stained and placed under the microscope. Remember that the epidermis is stratified squamous epithelium because we look at where the tissue begins down here at the bottom, and we look at the shape of the cells on the apical surface. So we have many layers of cells, meaning that it is stratified, and because they flatten out at the apical surface, we call it stratified squamous epithelium. The stratum granulosum is, again, normally between 3 and 5 cell layers thick. That can vary, and it's filled with organelles that are breaking down, as well as keratin and keratohyalin molecules. The layer that comes next in terms of working from bottom to top is going to be the stratum lucidum. Lucid means clear, so this is a clear layer. Remember, the stratum lucidum is only found in thick skin, which includes the skin on the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet, as well as the digits on the surfaces of the palms and the soles. Finally, we have the stratum corneum. The stratum corneum is the most superficial layer of the epidermis. It can be anywhere between 15 and 30 cell layers thick or more. Depends on where in the body we're looking at the stratum corneum. It's composed of keratinocytes that are dead. These are non-living cells. The entire layer of the stratum corneum is replaced every 4 weeks as the cells are being pushed from the stratum basal on upward or are shed during abrasion. Here we can actually see some of the cells in this picture that are identified. So we can see the keratinocytes here, the basal cells here. They're showing some melanin, which is this darker kind of, I don't know, almost brownish appearance that's being pointed to. I'm going to highlight over the melanin. And here is a melanocyte. You will not be asked to identify cells in pictures, by the way, for the layers of the epidermis. You may be asked about the cells and what their function is, but in terms of being able to identify these cells on a slide, that will not be part of the process. So again, just to review, we said that keratinocytes are important because they produce the protein known as keratin, which helps to make your skin a little bit more waterproof than it would be without that protein. It also helps to make the skin a little bit tougher, a little bit harder. And the keratinocytes are the most common type of cells found in the epidermis. They are held together by desmosomes. You may remember earlier when we talked about intercellular junctions that we said that cells that are held together by desmosomes, when they are removed or sloughed off, they'll often come off in sheets because the desmosomes are so tight. And that's why if you see somebody with a really bad sunburn, that skin will peel off in sheets. The keratinocytes are being derived from the basal cells in the stratum basal, and they differentiate into keratinocytes that form keratin in the stratum spinosum. So the basal cells are undergoing rapid mitosis to form into keratinocytes. Some of the basal cells do turn into melanocytes, and we know that melanocytes produce the protein pigment melanin, which lends to the color tone of people's skin. The Langerhans cells, we already said, are called dendritic cells that act as macrophages to help our immune system fight against bacteria and other pathogens, as well as eat up debris. The Merkel cells, or tactile cells, are going to be stimulated to release chemical messengers when they are compressed with just light touch, and that will stimulate nerve endings with which those cells communicate. The dermis is the thicker of the two layers of the integument, the epidermis being the most superficial layer, the dermis being deep to that, is comprised of two distinct layers itself. There is a superficial papillary layer of the dermis, which makes up about 20%, and a deeper reticular layer, which comprises the remaining 80% of the dermis. The dermis has nipple-like projections that you can see on this picture sticking upward
in various places, reaching towards the epidermis. You can see them a little better on the right-hand side of this picture as they've removed the epidermis from the dermis. These upward nipple-like projections are referred to as papillae, and the papillary layer of the dermis gets its name from the dermal papillae that interdigitate with the stratum basale of the epidermis. And if you think about the increased surface area of the dermal papillae, that allows for more area of the stratum basale to form a connection with the underlying connective tissue. So we see the papillary layer contains blood vessels, lymphatic vessels. It contains phagocytic cells, nerves. Special encapsulated nerve endings called Meissner's corpuscles are found in the papillary layer of the dermis, and the papillary layer is made up mostly of loose areolar connective tissue. The underlying reticular layer, remember when your brain hears the word reticular, it's going to translate that into network. So the reticular layer of the dermis is going to consist of dense, irregular connective tissue that's full of elastic fibers, blood vessels, nerves, and accessory structures for the integument, which includes things like hair follicles, sebaceous glands, sweat glands, the erector pili muscles, Pacinian corpuscles, Ruffini corpuscles, nociceptors, which are going to transmit information for pain when tissue damage occurs, as well as hair follicle receptors will be found in the reticular layer. And then last but not least, we have the hypodermis. Remember, the hypodermis is not considered a true layer of the integument. It is going to contain mostly adipose connective tissue interspersed with some highly vascularized loose areolar connective tissue, and is strongly connected to the reticular layer of the dermis by way of collagen fibers. You remember that collagen is the most abundant protein in the human body. One of the main functions of our integument is to transmit sensation. So we've got different types of sensory receptors in the epidermis and in the dermis. Looking at this particular picture on the left, you will see labeled a Meissner's corpuscle. Meissner's corpuscles are encapsulated nerve endings that are located in the dermal papillae, and they're interspersed throughout the dermis. Meissner's corpuscles transmit impulses with regard to light touch. We also see deeper in the dermis an encapsulated nerve ending that forms a Pacinian corpuscle. Always reminds me of an onion when I look at it. Pacinian corpuscles will transmit information regarding deep pressure and vibration. Ruffini's corpuscles are important because they will transmit information regarding tissue stretch. And Merkel's discs, as they are labeled on this picture, they're actually Merkel's cells or tactile cells. Some texts will refer to them as Merkel's discs, but they're actually Merkel's cells or tactile cells, and what you're seeing is a picture of these cells in the stratum basale. There are free nerve endings that are important in the transmission of lots of different kinds of information. Free nerve endings can act as thermoreceptors to transmit information on temperature. They can act as nociceptors to transmit information about pain or tissue damage. They can act as mechanoreceptors sometimes when there is mechanical deformation. So free nerve endings can do different types or transmit different types of information. Just to back up a little bit, The Merkel's discs, we already said, I'll repeat it, those are responsible for transmitting information regarding light touch. The free nerve endings actually extend into the epidermis, and this picture does not do them justice because it appears that they end in the papillary layer of the dermis. That is not true. They go into the epidermis. Remember, the epidermis, being stratified squamous epithelium, has no blood vessels. It is avascular. Therefore, if a person gets a shallow paper cut, because of the free nerve endings in the epidermis as well as in the dermis, pain sensations will be transmitted. However, since there are no blood vessels, with that cut only going into the epidermis, there will be no bleeding. Bleeding only occurs if a cut goes into the dermis itself. This takes us to friction ridges. Friction ridges are sometimes referred to as fingerprints because they are the ridges formed by the dermal papillae in the dermis just deep to the epidermis. And there's a cute little picture of the friction ridges in a gecko. And geckos, if you've ever had one or seen one, they also have little barbs that enable them to grab surfaces that they can walk up walls. Our friction ridges in our skin help to increase surface area, and that allows us to grip things more easily. And the fingerprints, again, are just the impressions of friction ridges. Fingerprints are unique to everyone. Even identical twins who have very similar DNA do not have exact DNA. And the fingerprints of twins will vary slightly because their DNA varies slightly. As we mentioned before, the epidermal ridges that are created by the dermal papillae just deep to the epidermis are going to be important on creating a nice bond between the epidermis and the dermis. They are genetically determined, therefore are unique for each and every person. Because we have these ridges on the surface of our skin, our fingerprints, those ridges help us grip with our fingers as well as our toes. And there are sweat glands that will actually open up on the tops of the ridges. If you've ever been in water for a long time, you may notice that the skin starts to get a wrinkled appearance. And the wrinkling occurs for two reasons. One is that there is some water that will start to move into the cells by way of diffusion, and that causes them to enlarge a little bit. The other reason that wrinkling occurs is because our sympathetic nervous system will cause the blood vessels to vasoconstrict. They're going to close down, and that will also produce wrinkles in the skin. And when people have nerve damage, that doesn't occur in their hands if they're in water for too long, because they're just not going to have that sympathetic nervous response causing the vasoconstriction in the blood vessels. So the majority of the wrinkling is a sympathetic nervous response, and it's helpful for people to have wrinkled skin when they've been in the water for a while, because it actually does help improve their ability to hold things underwater. Our skin color is determined by the type of melanin that our bodies produce, as well as the amount of melanin that's produced, rather than the number of melanocytes. Our melanocytes have organelles called melanosomes, and the melanin is actually produced in the melanosomes. So the more melanosomes that are in a person's melanocytes, the more melanin will be produced. So it's due to the amount and type of melanin, as well as the number of melanosomes, not by the number of melanocytes. When we accumulate melanin, that can form structures that we refer to as freckles or liver spots, and sometimes accumulations of melanocytes will form structures that we refer to as moles. Melanin comes in two forms. We've got eumelanin, which is black or brown in color, and pheomelanin, which is reddish in color. So if somebody has red hair, that person has pheomelanin. And we have melanocytes not only in our skin, but we actually have it in a layer of pigmented epithelium in the back of our eyeballs. Because when light enters our eyes, we have to have a way to absorb excess light waves, or the light will just bounce around and overstimulate photoreceptors. So people with less melanin in their bodies tend to have lighter skin and lighter eyes. They're going to want to wear sunglasses when it's really bright outside. People with darker skin and darker eyes tend to have more melanin in the back of their eyes and tend to not be so concerned with wearing sunglasses when they go outside, because their eyes are just not bothered by the sun the way somebody with lighter eyes would be bothered by it. There is a genetic inability to produce melanin, which is known as albinism, and people who are truly albino are not producing melanin, and that's true for their skin, their hair, and their eyes. So they tend to want to go outside after the sun sets, and they usually wear very, very dark glasses because they have no way to protect their eyes from that light hitting their photoreceptors and bouncing around. So they are legally blind very often. Melanin is made with a specific amino acid known as tyrosine. And we already said that the production of melanin is going to occur in special structures known as melanosomes. Those are the organelles inside melanocytes that are going to produce melanin. And as I said before, we see them in pigment cells in the skin as well as the eye. The melanosomes not only function to produce melanin, they can actually store it as well. Whenever we expose our skin to sunlight, that stimulates the melanocytes to produce more melanin, and the melanin actually helps to absorb ultraviolet radiation, preventing damage to our DNA and neutralizing free radicals. This helps protect the keratinocytes in our cells as well. There are other factors that can contribute to skin color. For instance, hemoglobin is the protein that is responsible for carrying oxygen through our bloodstream. It carries carbon dioxide too. When oxygen binds to the heme group on hemoglobin, which contains iron, that causes the hemoglobin to become a brighter red color. And so for people who have light skin or are fair-skinned, it's easier to see that reddish color due to the hemoglobin in blood vessels when they don't have a lot of melanin in their skin. Keratin is also a pigment that can contribute a yellow-orange color. Keratin is also often stored in fat in our bodies, and it's also seen in the stratum corneum in the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet. Now, keratin can be converted into vitamin A. However, if a person eats food that contains a lot of keratin, he very well may take on an orangish appearance. That happened to my uncle, who was just a year or two younger than I am. He was living at my dad's house for a while, and he started taking tanning pills. These tanning pills contained a lot of keratin, and I kid you not, when I went to visit my dad and my uncle was sitting at the dinner table looking as bright orange as a brand new basketball because of all the keratin that was in his tissue, in his hypodermis. Remember, the hypodermis is just under the dermis, and we store vitamin A in fat, in adipocytes. There are other factors that can contribute to skin color, and not all of them are homeostatic imbalances, but most of the ones listed here are. Redness or erythema can be caused very commonly when someone has a fever or hypertension. Inflammation, allergies can cause erythema. Blushing, I wouldn't necessarily say is a homeostatic imbalance, but blushing would be a temporary transitory condition of erythema. Pallor or blanching, when somebody turns white, can be caused by fear, anger, emotional stress, anemia, low blood pressure. Jaundice is a yellowish appearance of the skin, often caused by a liver disorder, and it usually doesn't just affect the skin. You can see in this picture the gentleman's whites of his eyes, the sclera, are turning yellow as well. We see that in mucous membranes of the gums of people who are really badly jaundiced. Bronzing is a brownish metallic appearance of the skin caused by Addison's disease, pituitary gland tumors, a black and bluish coloring due to bruising happens when blood escapes from capillaries, and if we have a mass of blood that collects, that is referred to as a hematoma. Sometimes people get a bluish color of their skin, which is often seen more commonly in the lips and fingertips. And if there's not enough oxygen due to restriction of airways from asthma or allergies or lung fibrosis, that bluish appearance is referred to as cyanosis. I'm not going to go over this slide, it's just going to take too long to do that, but you have it available to you in the other PowerPoint attachment in Blackboard. So if you want to go through this, it would not be a bad idea to go through and just review for this part of this chapter.